I firmly believe the feds are watching everybody in Diddy's universe.
P. Diddy's alleged drug mule will not face jail time after reaching a plea agreement with prosecutors in Florida. But could the feds still be on his tail?
If Brendan Paul ends up in a more serious situation, they can use that as leverage to try to find out more information about what went on with Diddy's parties and at Diddy's homes.
This is 25-year-old Brendan Paul. He's a former Syracuse University basketball player, but he's better known off the court as P. Diddy's alleged drug mule. These allegations date back to February, when a bombshell civil lawsuit against P. Diddy called out Brendan Paul by name, listing him as someone who allegedly acquires and distributes Diddy guns and drugs. This was the lawsuit filed by Rodney Jones, better known as Lil Rod. He's P. Diddy's former producer, who laid out a laundry list of serious allegations against Diddy. Lil Rod claims Diddy sexually assaulted him, groomed him to have sex with celebrities, and was the kingpin in a gun, drug, and sex trafficking empire. Similar allegations against Diddy had already been brought forward back in November of last year, when 4 civil suits were filed against Diddy. That includes suits from his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, who you know as the singer Cassie, along with Joy Dickerson Neal, Liza Gardner, and a woman who identified herself only as Jane Doe. All 3 women alleged Diddy raped them, with the allegations dating back to the early 90s. That brings us to March 25th of this year, when federal search warrants were executed at 2 of Diddy's properties in both California and Florida. Almost 2 months later, Diddy has not been arrested and no charges have been filed. But things didn't stay quiet in Diddy's world for long. On March 27th, just 2 days after those federal raids, Brendan Paul was arrested at the airport in Miami while trying to board Diddy's private jet. Paul was arrested and charged with cocaine and marijuana possession, but the latter charge was quickly dropped. Just this week, there's been movement in his case in the way of a plea deal. The bottom line, Brendan Paul will not face jail time.
And he would have been facing 5 years in prison.
That's former prosecutor Melba Pearson, who previously worked in the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, the same one that brought charges against Paul. As she explains, Paul's plea deal included something called a diversion program.
But since he did not have anything in his past, he didn't have a criminal history, he was offered what was called diversion. And what that does is that it gives you the opportunity for participation in a program for 6 months. If you don't get arrested again, if you complete the program, so it could be drug therapy, it could be counseling, it could be community service, it could be any of a number of things, it just could be a fine. You comply, you do all of that, and then after 6 months, the charges get dropped against you, meaning that you don't have anything on your criminal record in terms of a conviction. The rest will still be on your record. You'll have to disclose that if let's say you do a job application and they ask whether or not you've been arrested, you have to answer yes. But if they ask you if you've been convicted, you can check no, which is, again, a huge thing in terms of collateral consequences and being able to move forward with your life after interaction with the criminal justice system.
Paul's attorney, Brendan Bieber, released this statement in regard to the plea, quote, "Brendan accepted the prosecutor's offer to permit his entry into the diversion program, which, after completion, the case against him will be dismissed in its entirety." The Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office also made a statement saying the plea was a, quote, "standard offer to a nonviolent defendant with no priors, who was arrested for a possession case instead of a much more serious trafficking case." From the time Brendan Paul was arrested in late March to now, it hasn't been that long, about 2 months. Are you surprised at how quickly things were wrapped up?
I'm not incredibly surprised because, again, this is something that happened in Miami. This is an office that I used to work for, and I remember the volume of cases I had when I was a prosecutor, especially a line prosecutor handling that level of felony. So that is a normal outcome. That's not very bizarre. And actually, another to put a finer point on it, I don't think that he had to testify or do anything else in exchange for the plea, right? Normally, if we see a case wrap up this quickly, that would be the first thing that I'd be asking, like, oh, okay, what else did you do in exchange for that favorable plea? But looking at his history, looking at the volume of cases, and also looking at the severity of the charge, in the universe of things, it's not trafficking. It's literally possession of cocaine with an argument that could have been made that this was for personal use. I wasn't trying to resell it. I wasn't trying to, take it overseas or make money off of it. This is just, for me to party this weekend, right? When you look at it from that perspective, the outcome, the resolution, the plea makes a lot of sense and is not outside of the norm.
We have to pause this Brendan Paul story for just a sec to give you a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge. Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their Incognito browser. If you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions at incognitoclaims.com/LCnews. Now back to the latest with P. Diddy and Brendan Paul. Behind closed doors, Melba theorizes that Paul's team went to the state attorney's office almost right away.
Yeah, so what I think probably happened is that Brendan Paul knew, obviously, he was caught with it on him. Probably there was a lab test that indicated that what the police seized that day actually was, in fact, cocaine. So this is not something you go to trial with, right? You already know you're caught dead to rights. So the question is, how can we resolve it? So I'm sure his attorney reached out to the prosecutor's office, asked to see if a diversion plea was on the table. And the prosecutor, again, looking at the facts, looking at the history, his criminal history, looking at the totality of the circumstances, was like, you know what? A diversion plea makes the most sense. And at least number one, it assures the safety of the community. Because again, as much as Brandon Paul was a part of Diddy's universe, we haven't really heard that he himself was participating in the harm that was done to the people that attended those parties, to the survivors, right? He procured drugs for the parties, but they didn't say much about him himself participating in harming people. I think that distinction would have been problematic if there was some discussion of him harming people. Then he may not have gotten a diversion plea. He may have gotten something along the lines of probation, and maybe there would have been more pressure on him to testify against Diddy in any investigation. Again, that's not to say that the feds can't call him up and say, we need to talk to you. That can happen at any point in time, separate and distinct from this case.
Is it possible that investigators asked Brendan Paul anything about Diddy, or would they not even ask at all because it was completely unrelated?
I think that it's two unrelated investigations, right? So he was caught at the Opelika airport, which is a private airport, with the drugs on him, even though that was something that came out of the federal investigation, and the federal agents would probably be keeping an eye on what's happening. They would question him about anything having to do with Diddy. Local law enforcement, the Miami-Dade Police Department, whoever it is that actually made the arrest, they wouldn't question him about Diddy. They'd only question him about the drugs, and if there was some other connection to Diddy, just in the narrow avenue, talking about the drugs, not about the sexual assaults or anything like that, just the drugs. It would be up to the feds to decide if they want to question him and how they want to question him with regards to Diddy and the sexual assault allegations.
That leads to my next question because Brendan Paul's arrest happened just days after these federal raids at two of Diddy's homes. And we know that Brendan Paul was arrested by Miami-Dade officials and Homeland Security, the same people who performed the raids at Diddy's homes. Do those two things relate at all? Is it possible that Homeland Security was keeping an eye on Diddy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is a matter of trying to catch everybody they can in his universe. And again, use that as an opportunity to put pressure on him in terms of getting him to cooperate with the investigation, or again, just trying to figure out what he actually did, when he did it, and what charges can be filed against him. So it's connected from that perspective. But again, I don't see the Miami-Dade Police Department questioning him about what's happening with Diddy. That would be up to Homeland Security, basically federal agents who would be leading that particular investigation.
Paul's attorney says he's already part of the diversion program. But if Brendan Paul slips up again, there may not be the same outcome. What happens if Brendan Paul is caught again with drugs while he's during this diversion program? Would that be even more severe for him?
Absolutely. So if he is caught with or arrested again for drug possession moving forward, the question would be number one, amount. If it's back in that same realm of cocaine possession, smaller amounts, then again, he can possibly make the argument, I have an addiction, I need help. And usually the courts will be sympathetic with that because we all know in the criminal justice system that people who are struggling with addiction, they don't get over it in one fell swoop, right? Like basically you can relapse several times before you actually become clean and sober. So they usually have some grace when it comes to that. Now, if he's caught with trafficking amounts of cocaine, that's a whole different story, right? Or if it's a matter of sale of cocaine, again, that's all speaking to the amount of cocaine that he had on him. If it ends up being something like that, first of all, the initial charge, that initial cocaine possession case, comes back in full force. So he gets thrown out of the diversion program and then has to face either going to trial or taking another plea to the cocaine possession that's going to be more severe in nature. On top of that, he's facing whatever's happening with the new case that he is arrested for. So if he's arrested for a trafficking amount, he could be looking at 15 years in prison. Again, it all depends on the quantity of the drugs that he's caught with. And then he'll have to figure out how to resolve that case at that point.
As far as the allegations brought on by Lil Rod, Brendan Paul was listed several times. First, simply as Diddy's mule. The lawsuit reads Paul, quote, works as Mr. Combs' mule. He acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns. But in Lil Rod's second amended complaint, he gets more specific. The suit reads, quote, members of the enterprise and their associates procured, transported, and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, mushrooms, and 2C by packing these substances in their carry-on luggage and going through TSA. Plaintiff Jones personally witnessed members of the enterprise do this during national and international travel. The lawsuit specifies Lil Rod witnessed Brendan Paul participate in this alleged trafficking on December 22, 2022, on a trip from Miami, Florida to St. Barthélemy or St. Bart's. What's next for Brendan Paul? I mean, he was mentioned in Lil Rod's lawsuit that alleged some pretty severe things. Is it possible that the feds are keeping an eye on Brendan Paul as time goes on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I firmly believe the feds are watching everybody in Diddy's universe. And while they may be more active in surveillance of other people, some people more than others, they're still going to be keeping an eye because, again, if Brendan Paul ends up in a more serious situation, they can use that as leverage to try to find out more information about what went on with Diddy's parties and at Diddy's homes. So it's possible.
How does this relate to Lil Rod at all? I mean, it's completely separate charges. There have been no criminal charges in the allegations that Lil Rod brought forward about Diddy or Brendan Paul, but does it relate at all?
It does from the standpoint of it brings more credibility to what he was saying. And again, this is court of public opinion, right? So he releases this, he files this lawsuit. It gets released into the media with these bombshell, explosive allegations. And a lot of people were like, this seems like really beyond the pale. I mean, this seems insane, right? And then you match that up with what Cassie Ventura said, you start to see a pattern. Now you see somebody else that was mentioned in that universe arrested for drug possession, and Little Rod, alleged that Brendan Paul was the one who was the drug man of choice for Diddy and his parties. And now he's arrested in Miami, by Diddy's jet for drug possession. Again, it just kind of boosts his credibility. And it also kind of boosts Cassie's credibility as well, because again, you're seeing one long line of truth and accuracy in everything that they're saying.
Melba says Florida, specifically Miami, where Diddy has a home and Brendan Paul was arrested, has kept an eye on the case.
People are talking about it, but I can't say that it's one of the things that, the entire town is abuzz with regards to this, right? I think there was always just sort of like some question in terms of, especially in recent history, like, what's really going on with him. And a matter of once that lawsuit involving Cassie was made public, I think nobody was incredibly shocked by the fact that he was arrested. I think there's been some discussion in terms of the amount of agents that went to his house to conduct the search. There were some people that felt it was a government overreach because of the number of officers that showed up, et cetera, et cetera. I'm kind of neutral on that from the perspective of it's a large property, right? So you're not going to send 5 people to go search a multi-acre property with multiple bedrooms and all sorts of different areas where evidence can be hidden. So I wasn't too disturbed by that, but at the same token, I can see how some people, again, seeing that show of force and, lots of armed agents crawling around a luxury home, I can see how that can be jarring for a lot of folks. So, that would be the extent of the discussion that we're really hearing down here in Florida around Diddy and his case or potential case.
At this point, we're inching toward June, which would put us at the 2-month mark since these federal raids, and still we have no criminal charges. What do you think is next for Diddy? I know we've spoken in the past that if federal prosecutors are hoping to build a case against them, they're going to be pretty meticulous, but we still haven't seen an arrest. So what do you expect?
I expect that the investigation is going to continue. I was never under the impression this was going to be a quick arrest because, again, when the Department of Justice, when the U.S. Attorney's offices are helping to coordinate an investigation, even with Homeland Security or the other entities that are involved, this is a slow, methodical process. They usually come to trial with the physical evidence, with audio surveillance, video surveillance, that they're and high quality evidence as well. So if they can't gather that, and if they can't bring forth a level of evidence that they feel is necessary to assure a conviction, not that, yeah, I think we have enough to file. No, no, no. They want to make sure 110% that this is going to result in the conviction. They are not going to file until they feel that ready. So I think that this could drag on for a few more months before we see anything.
We haven't heard from Diddy's defense since the raids, but here's what we do know. Diddy's attorneys call the federal raids a gross overuse of military-level force, saying there's no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated. In response to Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy's team says in part, quote, his reckless name-dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. And Diddy's last statement about the allegations came in December 2023 with a post to social media. It reads, quote, enough is enough. For the last couple of weeks, I've sat silently and watched people try to assassinate my character, destroy my reputation and my legacy. Sickening allegations have been made against me by individuals looking for a quick payday. Let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. I will fight for my name, my family, and for the truth. As for the allegations regarding Brendan Paul, his attorney released a statement back in March saying, quote, we do not plan on trying this case in the media. All issues will be dealt with in court. From here, Brendan Paul now undergoes the 6-month diversion program. For now, the charges against him are still pending, but if and when he completes the program, they'll be dropped. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.